Never told him about the properties. Not on our first date, not when he met my sister, not even when he slipped that ring onto my finger at a little ceremony in my backyard in Oakville last September. I smiled. I said yes, and I kept my mouth shut. And honestly, it's the smartest thing I've ever done. Let me back up. My name is Audrey. I'm 63 years old. I live in a semi-detached on a quiet street near the lake, and I have been taking care of myself for a long time. My first husband, Gerald, passed 11 years ago from a heart attack. Sudden. He was shoveling the driveway on a Tuesday morning, and by noon, he was gone. We had 26 good years together. 2 grown kids, a dog named Biscuit, and a vegetable garden that I still keep going because it makes me feel close to him somehow. After Gerald died, I didn't fall apart. Or maybe I did, quietly, for about a year, and then I put myself back together because there was no other option. I went back to work full-time at the dental clinic where I'd been office manager since my youngest started school. I paid off the mortgage. I figured out how to do my own taxes. I learned that the furnace filter needs to be changed every 3 months and that you should never ignore a dripping faucet because a dripping faucet will become your entire personality if you let it. And somewhere along the way, I bought a duplex. It wasn't some grand plan. A property 2 streets over went up for sale, and my neighbor Ruth kept saying it was a good price, and my financial advisor kept saying real estate in the GTA corridor was solid, and eventually, I just did it. I put down a reasonable amount, got a mortgage I could manage on my salary, found 2 tenants, and that was that. I didn't feel like a real estate investor. I felt like a woman who had accidentally become a landlord and was now spending her Saturday mornings fielding calls about leaky Evistros. Then, 4 years later, I bought another one, a small bungalow in Hamilton that needed work but had good bones. My son-in-law at the time knew a contractor. The numbers made sense, and I did it again. By the time I turned 61, both properties were rented, both mortgages were nearly paid off, and I had a small but steady income coming in every month on top of my pension and the clinic salary. I didn't broadcast this. My kids knew in a general sense. They knew Mom had some rental properties, but I never sat them down and explained the full picture. My friends knew even less. It wasn't secrecy exactly. It was more that I grew up in a household where you didn't talk about money. My mother's generation didn't. You kept that to yourself. It wasn't polite dinner conversation. I'm telling you all this because you need to understand I wasn't hiding the properties because I was ashamed. I was keeping them private because I always had. It was just how I lived. I met him through my friend Patsy's barbecue. His name was Douglas. 67, recently widowed. His wife had passed 2 years before from cancer, and he was tall and had a good laugh, and he brought a really excellent potato salad that he'd apparently made himself. We talked for 3 hours on Patsy's back deck. He was from Burlington originally, had worked in project management for a construction firm for most of his career, had 2 adult children of his own. He was charming. He was attentive. He asked questions, and he actually listened to the answers. We dated for 18 months. He was kind to me. He opened doors and remembered details and never once made me feel like I was too old to be loved again. My daughter liked him. My son was cautiously optimistic. Even my sister Colleen, who was suspicious of everyone on principle, admitted he seemed all right. About 6 months in, finances came up naturally the way they do when 2 adults are getting serious. He mentioned his pension, his RRSP, his plan to start drawing CPP at 68. I mentioned the clinic, my pension, my own savings. I said I had a couple of rental properties. He nodded, didn't press, moved on. I was vague. And I was vague on purpose, and I told myself it was just because it was too early. But it wasn't too early. Not really. I think if I'm honest, some part of me was watching, not suspiciously. I didn't have a specific reason to distrust him, But I'd been alone for 11 years. I'd built something. And I suppose I wanted to be chosen for me before I became a line item on someone's financial planning spreadsheet. We got a prenuptial agreement. That was my idea, and to his credit, he didn't fight it. He said he understood, that he had assets of his own he wanted to protect for his kids, that it made sense. We each had our own lawyer. We signed it. I felt good about that. What I didn't do was fully disclose the current value of the properties. Our agreement was structured around broad categories. What was mine before the marriage remained mine. It was solid. But during those conversations, when his lawyer asked about my assets, I listed them accurately in category without going into detail about equity or current market value. Everything was above board legally. But I kept the specific numbers quiet. At the time, I thought I was maybe being a little overly cautious. 11 months later, I understood exactly why I had done it. We got married in my backyard on a Saturday in September. 23 guests, a caterer from a Portuguese place on Lakeshore that my daughter found, and a string of lights in the old maple tree that Gerald and I had planted together the year we moved in. It was genuinely lovely. I cried a little. Douglas cried a little. My granddaughter, who was 4, ate an entire bowl of shrimp cocktail and then fell asleep under the gift table, which I will remember for the rest of my life. His daughter, I'll call her his daughter, because that's all she ever was to me, a role, not a relationship, flew in from Calgary. She was in her late 30s, worked in finance, and she smiled at me with the specific smile of someone who has already formed an opinion and is being polite about it. I noticed it, but told myself I was imagining things. You do that. You want it to work. So you explain away the small things. The first sign came about 3 weeks after we got back from our honeymoon in Prince Edward Island. Douglas and I had settled into a reasonable rhythm at my place. We'd decided to list his condo and base ourselves in Oakville since my house was larger and the garden was there. And honestly, I think he liked the neighborhood. His daughter called one evening while we were doing dishes, and I could hear her through the phone even though I wasn't meant to. Not the words exactly, but the tone. Urgent. Pressured. He went quiet in the way people go quiet when a conversation is going somewhere uncomfortable. After he hung up, he was distracted for the rest of the night. I didn't push. I'd been married before. I know that some conversations need space. But then a week later she came to visit, and things shifted in a way I can only describe as the air changing in a room. She was perfectly pleasant to my face. She complimented my kitchen. She asked about my grandchildren. And then, the second evening, after dinner while I was putting the kettle on, I heard her and Douglas in the living room, and I heard her say, clearly, "Dad, I just want to make sure you're protected. She owns property. Do you know what that's actually worth?" I stood at the counter for a moment. The kettle started to heat. I didn't go in. That night, Douglas mentioned casually, too casually, that his daughter had suggested we sit down with a financial planner together to get a full picture. He said it like it was a reasonable idea, which on the surface it was. People do that, but the timing and the framing and the way he didn't quite meet my eyes when he said it put a cold feeling in my stomach. I said I'd think about it. I was polite. I always am. Over the next 2 months, the questions became more frequent and less casual. How much was the Hamilton property currently renting for? Had I thought about what I'd do with the properties eventually? Had I looked into whether there were any tax advantages to restructuring? His daughter called almost every week now. He started mentioning here and there that she was just trying to help, that she was good with money, that maybe it would be useful to have someone take a look at things. Then, one Sunday afternoon, he sat me down and told me that his daughter had done some research. He said free search, and she thought it might make sense, from an estate planning perspective, for me to add him to the title of at least one of the properties, just the Oakville one, she had apparently suggested, as a gesture of commitment, as a way of building a shared future. I looked at him for a long moment. Did she suggest that? I said. Or did you? He said it had come up in conversation and he thought it was worth discussing. I said I would need to talk to my lawyer. He looked surprised. I don't think he expected me to have a lawyer on speed dial, which is something I've thought about since. He'd never asked, and I'd never mentioned, that I had maintained a relationship with my solicitor, Gwen, ever since the duplex purchase 10 years ago. I called Gwen the next morning from my car in the clinic parking lot so Douglas wouldn't hear. She was not surprised. She has heard everything. She told me to write down every conversation, every request, every suggestion, dates, what was said, who initiated it. She said to do it that night and keep the notes somewhere he couldn't access. I went home, said nothing, and after Douglas fell asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and typed 3 pages of notes on my laptop and emailed them to Gwen. The next week, I ran a proper background check. I should have done it before the wedding. I know that, but I hadn't, because he'd come through someone I trusted, and because I had the prenup, and because 18 months of good behavior had made me comfortable. The check came back with nothing alarming, some debt, which he'd mentioned, and which was covered in the prenup, but it confirmed that his daughter worked for an investment firm, which I had not known, and that she had a professional understanding of real estate assets that made her interest in mine considerably less just trying to help. I started to pay closer attention. What I noticed, once I was paying attention, was a pattern of small erosions. It wasn't dramatic. It never is, I think, at the start. It was him suggesting I could probably simplify my finances by consolidating accounts, somewhere we could both see them easily. It was his daughter mentioning over the phone that she knew a property manager who was much more efficient than whoever I was using and could probably increase my yield. Her word, yield, if I let her take a look. It was Douglas mentioning gently that he'd been covering more of the household groceries lately and wondered if we should think about a joint account for expenses, which would have required me to put money somewhere we could both access. Every request on its own was reasonable. Together they were a map. I called Gwen again. She referred me to a colleague who specialized in matrimonial property disputes, a woman I'll call my second lawyer to keep things simple. My second lawyer listened to everything I'd documented and said very calmly that I had done several things right by instinct: the prenup, the limited disclosure, the documentation, and that I should continue doing them. She also said that if Douglas was willing to work with a mediator and separate from his daughter's involvement, there might be a real marriage worth saving underneath the pressure. I want to be fair here. I don't know how much of this was Douglas and how much was his daughter. I genuinely don't know if he was a man being manipulated by a daughter who had her own agenda, or a man who had agreed to a plan before the wedding and played a long game. I've thought about it many times. I think the honest answer is that it probably doesn't matter, because either way the relationship was not what I believed it to be. I asked him one evening in January, when the snow was coming down and we were sitting in the kitchen, to tell me honestly what his daughter had said to him before the wedding about my properties. He was quiet for a while. Then he said she had mentioned before the wedding that with proper planning, rental properties in the current market could represent a significant legacy opportunity for a blended family. Legacy opportunity, that was the phrase. I looked at him across the table, and I thought about Gerald shoveling the driveway in the vegetable garden and my granddaughter asleep under the gift table, and I felt something settle in me that I can only describe as clarity. I told him I wanted to speak to a mediator. He agreed, which I will give him credit for. We had 3 sessions. By the 3rd session, it was clear to both of us that the foundation of trust wasn't there, and that repairing it would require a degree of transparency from his side. Specifically, full transparency about his daughter's involvement and intentions that he was not willing to provide. We separated in March. Civil, quiet, everything governed by the prenup. He moved back to Burlington to stay with his son while he sorted out new accommodation. His daughter posted something on social media about protecting family values that I chose not to engage with. My solicitor Gwen handled the separation paperwork. My second lawyer confirmed that because of the limited financial disclosure during the prenup process, combined with the documentation I had kept, my properties were entirely protected. There was nothing to contest. I still have the duplex. I still have the bungalow in Hamilton. I still have my house in Oakville with the old maple tree and the vegetable garden. I still have my granddaughter, who recently informed me that shrimp cocktail is her favorite food and who I take to the farmer's market on Saturday mornings when the weather is good. I'm not bitter. I want to be clear about that because people sometimes expect bitterness and I just don't have it. What I have is a clear-eyed understanding of something I maybe already knew but needed to learn properly, that the things you build when you are alone belong to you, and you are allowed to protect them. And protecting them is not the same thing as not being capable of love. I loved Gerald for 26 years. I could have loved Douglas too, I think, if he had ever actually shown up as himself. What I know now is this. Before you marry again, do the background check. Do it early. Do it properly. Don't wait until you already have feelings and the caterer booked. Get the prenup and make sure it is specific and that you have your own lawyer who is not in any way connected to the other side. Keep your financial picture private until you have reason to share it, not the other way around. Document everything that makes you uncomfortable, even if you feel silly doing it, because you can always delete notes you didn't need and you cannot recreate notes you never took. And if someone describes your life's work as a legacy opportunity before the ink on the marriage certificate is dry, pay attention to that. Pay very close attention to that. I got back to the clinic in April. Ruth, my neighbor, came over for tea and asked how I was doing. And I told her I was doing just fine. And I meant it. The Evistros on the duplex needed cleaning, the maple tree was starting to bud, and my financial advisor had just told me that the Hamilton property had increased significantly in value over the past 2 years. I made myself a cup of tea and sat in the backyard and thought about Gerald and thought about my granddaughter and thought about how strange and full of life can be if you just keep showing up for it. I'm 63 years old. I take care of myself, and I have learned more than once that that is enough. I still think about that evening at the kitchen table, the snow coming down outside, Douglas quiet across from me, and that phrase sitting between us like something that couldn't be taken back. Legacy opportunity. 2 words that told me everything I needed to know about how he had seen me, maybe from the very beginning. I don't say that with anger anymore. I say it because I think it matters to be honest about what happened and why it happened, and what my own part in it was. Here's what I know. The way things ended was a direct result of the choices both of us made. Douglas made his choices, and his daughter made hers. But I made mine too. The limited disclosure, the notes I typed at midnight, the call to Gwen from the clinic parking lot, none of those things happened by accident. They happened because somewhere underneath the hope and the happiness of being loved again, I had not abandoned my own judgment. I had stayed awake, and the outcome, my properties intact, my house still mine, my life still mine, followed from that directly. Not luck. Choices. What I've come to understand is that good values aren't just about being kind and honest with other people. They're also about being honest with yourself. I wanted to believe Douglas was exactly who he appeared to be, and that wanting almost overrode what I was quietly noticing. The small evasions, the way he didn't quite meet my eyes, the 2 casual suggestions that kept coming from the same direction. Being a decent person doesn't mean ignoring those signals. It means holding both things at once, extending genuine good faith and keeping your eyes open at the same time. That's harder than it sounds when you actually care about someone. But it's necessary. The intelligence piece, and I mean that in the plainest sense, just paying attention and thinking clearly, saved me more than anything else. Keeping the documentation. understanding what the prenup actually covered and what it didn't, running the background check when I finally ran it, even though I felt silly doing it, even though I felt like I was betraying something. Information is not a weapon unless you use it as one. Used honestly, it's just the truth, and the truth in my case was that I had built something real over 11 years of solitary effort, and I had every right to understand who was asking questions about it and why. And then there's the part that I think is the hardest to talk about, which is just continuing. Separating in March, handling the paperwork, going back to the clinic in April, sitting in my backyard with a cup of tea while the maple tree budded. Not collapsing, not becoming bitter, not letting one bad outcome rewrite everything that came before it. Gerald was real. The 26 years were real. The duplex and the bungalow and the garden, and my granddaughter eating shrimp cocktail under the gift table. All of it real. All of it still mine. Getting back up after something disappointing is not a grand gesture. It's quiet and mostly invisible, and it happens in small rooms on ordinary mornings. But it is everything. I'm 63. I take care of myself, and I have learned, twice now in different ways, that the life you build is worth protecting, not out of fear, but out of respect for the work it took to build it.